thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Andy Semotiuk, and I'm a writer, obviously. I've published 4 books, actually published 5 and written 4 of the 5. I published my son's joke book called 401 Goofy Jokes for Kids. It was the 5th book. That's when he was 12, which is a long time ago. I'm from Canada. I was born and raised in Canada, in Edmonton. I'm now located in Toronto. I'm a U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer working with I was going to say Forbes, with Pace Law Firm, but I do write for Forbes, and I've been writing for Forbes for about 10 years now on the subject of immigration and the immigrant experience, for example. So that's where my work is. And then I guess you could say my passion is writing books about things like the immigrant experience. And in the case of the book I want to talk to you about today, it's a book about my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, who was the world's leading soprano in the golden age of opera, which was the first decade of the 1900s. A little bit more about me, if I may. I've been a UN correspondent. I worked in New York for a few years. I've worked in Los Angeles for 10 years as a lawyer, and 5 years in New York as a lawyer. Just before COVID, as a fluke, for some reason, I decided I'm going to move my stuff up to Toronto. I'm here because my wife's family's all here. And she said, okay, your family's all died off. My family's still all living in Toronto. We're moving to Toronto. And so I ended up here. And to my great fortune, COVID hit. And before that, I was like in New York and, traveling back and forth. But I managed to consolidate everything at Pace Law Firm. So that's where I am right now. I think that's pretty much, one other thing I should add. If my first year English professor at university heard today that I'm a writer and I write for Forbes and I've published books, he'd roll over in his grave because I was pathetic in English in first year university. He took pity at me and passed me on the final day when he could, just because he knew without getting English, I couldn't go on in my studies at university. So I don't know, life works in funny ways. And here I am now with you talking about, writing and books.
Love that. I would love if you could tell us what your book is about.
Yes. The book is called Solomea, Star of Opera's Golden Age. Now, you would think it's a book about opera, but it's not really about that. It's a book about making it to the top. And it's a book about a woman who reached the very pinnacle of her profession, raised from obscurity to world fame. She performed all over the world, in Europe, in Africa, in South America, in North America. She was in New York in 1928, performing in New York. She was booked to perform at Carnegie Hall, but she couldn't make it to Carnegie Hall because she was busy in Buenos Aires performing in operas in Buenos Aires. So her delayed arrival, they had to find another venue, and it was the Mecca Auditorium back then, which was a big deal. It's still there today. I think it's on 52nd Street. So she performed there. She performed in Philadelphia and Chicago. In 1928, in the height of jazz and, the roaring 20s, and Harlem was hot with music back then. Duke Ellington and all these guys were performing, and she came to town. It was the same year that the Chrysler Building was built, if you know the Chrysler Building. They had a competition going, who's going to make it first, Chrysler or the Empire State Building? And Chrysler made it in 1928. So it was an exciting time for her. And then after that, she went back to Europe and the Great Depression hit. Um, so, so the book's about her life, and I'd like to share one story from the book. There's lots of stories there. Like she died in 1952, and behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. But all her life she was in the West. She rose to fame in Italy, basically. She performed in La Scala and all the big opera theaters throughout Europe. But I like to tell this one story. And the reason I want to tell you it is because it's the 120th anniversary of the uh, first staging of the opera Madame Butterfly. Now, if you're an opera, that's one of the top operas today in the world. 120 years later, it's among the top. But let's say you're not an opera, and let's say you don't really care about opera. I'm still talking to you. I want to talk to you about this book and tell you this story because I believe it can move you. So a little bit about the opera and then about Solomea's performance in the opera. So in 1904, Giacomo Puccini, who was a great composer of operas back then, he was kind of like a rising star, one of the best, went to London and he saw a play, and it was about a geisha girl in Japan named Chiyo-Chiyo-san at the time when the American Navy came to Japan and opened it up to the West, and how she fell in love with an American naval officer named Pinkerton. He watched that play, which in turn was made or written from an article that was written by an American journalist who went to Japan and heard of the story and was so moved by the story that he came back and wrote it in a magazine. And the guy who wrote the play picked it up from that magazine article, wrote the play, for the stage play. And then Puccini, being in the audience, was so moved, he went to the playwright, and said, I have to have the rights to this story. And the guy wrote in his little piece somewhere later that when a hot-blooded Italian grabs you by the throat and says he wants the rights to your play, you don't say no. So he got it. And he went back to Italy, Milan, and he was going to stage this play by way of an opera. And he put together the opera, and he picked some of the greatest singers of the time to perform the lead roles in the opera. Not Solomea, the one that I wrote about, but a lady named Rosina Storchio played Chiyo-Chiyo-san. And there's a guy named Zenatello who played the tenor Pinkerton. They staged it at La Scala, the greatest theater in the world of opera at the time. He was so confident, Puccini, that the opera would be a success, that he even invited, which he never did, he invited his family, including his son and his sister, to attend the opening of the opera. And they write in their memoirs, Storchio does, and Puccini does, and other people who know about the opera, that they had a bad sense of it, about the opening. It was just not, something was not, it was very tense. People were very nervous. They reassured each other, but they staged the opera and it went horribly wrong. It was terrible. It was booed down. It was whistled down to the point where when the opera finished, Puccini decided to cancel the run. He canceled the run of the opera. The newspapers the next day were all glaring about how bad it was, etc. And he was crestfallen, completely, just devastated. So he went to his friend. This is all in the book, by the way. That's why I'm telling you. His friend was a guy named Arturo Toscanini. Now, if you're not an opera, again, you don't know this name, but you might, because he was eventually the conductor of NBC's symphony, the NBC TV network in New York. He was the conductor of their symphony or their orchestra later. But at that time, he was a conductor in Milan. So Toscanini Puccini went to Toscanini, they're good friends. He says, look, my opera's falling apart. I'm devastated. I don't know what to do. I can't let go of this. I have to have this. I got to stage this thing. And Toscanini said to him, there's only one lady who can help you get this opera up and running and make it a success. And her name is Solomea Krushelnytska was her last name. Krushelnytska. Today, that name is unknown to anybody in the English world, or very few people know her. Back then, it was known worldwide. Why her? She knew 8 languages. She knew the words and lyrics to over 50 operas by heart. She was the equivalent of someone like, I don't know, Julia Roberts or Sandra Bullock today in film, a big star. And she was friends with the two of them. And when he suggested it, Toscanini suggested it, Puccini said, I'll try her. And he went to see her and asked her, would you please come and help me put this opera together? And she had to think about it because, she's at the top of her fame. And now, for example, Julia Roberts just bombed in a film, and Sandra Bullock is invited to now play the lead role in the same film and make it a success. You got to think about that. And she said, okay, I'll do it. And she worked with Puccini to restage the opera in a place called Brescia, 60 miles away from Milan, in the Teatro Grande in 1904. Now, to perform this opera, she was about 30 years old. She had to play a 15-year-old. And she wore a Japanese kimono for 2 months every day to get herself into the role, to feel, like a geisha girl. A little more about this opera now. Pinkerton starts dating this Chiyo-san, and they have a romance. And they even go through a kind of a form of Japanese wedding. And thereafter, Pinkerton announces, hey, look, I have to go back to America. I'm being called back to America. But I'll come back. I promise you I'll come back. And she says, well, okay. And he leaves, not knowing that she's pregnant with his son. She waits for him 4 years, 5 years. Eventually, he comes back 5 years later. She's so happy that he's back, but there's a problem. He brings an American wife in tow. And when they meet, they have a crisis. The crisis is, should the boy stay with the mother, a geisha girl, and be raised by a geisha girl in Japan? What kind of future is that? Or should he go with the father back to America with the American mother or wife? And they agree the kid should go back to America. And in one of the final moments of the play, Chiyo-san takes the son, about 5 years old, off to the side. She leans over to him and she says these words. She says, look at this face. It is the face of your mother. Remember it. You'll never see it again. And then the boy goes off with the father. The mother, Chiyo-san, commits suicide and she dies. It's a very tragic opera, very powerful, tragic opera. So they stage it in Brescia. Everybody's nervous. They wonder if they're going to collapse again, life or death. Puccini's in the side of the stage smoking, chain smoking, like 2 packs of cigarettes in 2 hours. Even the audience was nervous, but they put it on and it became a great success. So much so that when it was finished, they got 7 standing ovations. Puccini was pulled out, like they're all standing ovations. That's a story in the book. That's one of the stories in the book. And a reason for why I wrote it, because I believe that that story is worthy of being told. especially because my great aunt, Solomea Krushelnytska, literally helped Puccini rescue that opera from a disaster.
Love that so much. What inspired you to sit down and write your book?
Well, I'll tell you, it's like this. I told you that, like, English was not very good for me, and I spent a lot of my life in Toastmasters. I don't know if you know about Toastmasters, but it's an organization that cultivates public speaking and presentation skills. And I thought, this is where I could make a mark. I'm going to go there. And for 35 years, I attended Toastmasters meetings every week for 1 hour, watching people present and watching people give feedback to people who were presenting. And I rose to the top of that organization. I became what's called a distinguished Toastmaster. But the world didn't want me to be a presenter at that time. There was no openings. Nobody called me and said, "Oh, Andy, you're a great presenter." They liked me. They liked my presentation skills. I mean, I was good. I hope I'm pretty good. But what opened up was writing. Even though I was a disaster. I don't know how early it was the United Nations, and I became a journalist. I wrote for a group called Southern News Services in Canada. They owned a couple of newspapers across the country, a freelancing kind of thing. And I wrote articles about immigration, human rights, things like that. And then I got into writing pieces that I would submit to newspapers and stuff like that. And then I told you about my son who wrote a book, 401 Goofy Jokes for Kids. That was a project that he had from junior achievement in school. And, he came home, he says, "Dad, I have to start a business." I said, "What kind of business you want to start?" He said, "I don't know. But junior achievement says we got to start a business." I says, "Well, okay, what do you like?" He says, "I like jokes." Okay. Well, why don't you do a joke book? Start a joke book. And that's what he did. And he started a joke book. And that's the 401 Goofy Jokes. So that's how we started. We wrote this joke book. Now, the joke book, that's a story in itself, which is, I'm Ukrainian in background. We all come from somewhere. Some of us are Italian, Greek, Jewish, whatever it is. My background's Ukrainian. Now, I was born in Canada. My family goes back in Canada 110 years, but before that, they came from Ukraine. And so, when he said, "Well, I got to write a joke book." Back then, I don't know if you remember, but there was a thing called Chernobyl, which was an explosion of a like a nuclear reactor. And there were children that were, harmed by that. And so the thought was, gee, could we help these children somehow? And we came up with this idea: publish the book, and if there's any proceeds, we send it to the children. And not only that, we thought, okay, we'll write an article in a newspaper in Ukraine and say, any children that send us joke books, and we include them in the book, we'll give you $1 US dollar. And so we published this thing. We're waiting. It was published, nothing. First week, nothing. Second week, nothing. Third week, 2 letters come in with jokes. Next week, 13 letters. Next week, hundreds of letters. We ended up with something like 2,000 letters with joke books. Now, this is a real problem because who's going to translate all these jokes? First, you got to read them, then you got to translate them. So he's translating. Mark is my son, Mark. He's now a big lawyer in Manhattan. He does real estate projects in Manhattan. He's now, what is he? I guess he's 40 now. He's got his own kids. But back then he was 12 years old. So, he's translating these jokes. And, like we're Canadian Ukrainian. We're not Ukrainians. We're Canadian Ukrainian. So our language is not perfect, So we're trying to that's too much for him. I'm in there translating. My wife is in there translating. The grandmother's in there translating. We had friends from the city coming over to translate. So we got all these translated jokes, and then he picked 401, and we published the joke. And that was the beginning of his career, although he's written some articles, but not another book yet. I expect it'll come. But it was also the beginning of my sort of publishing career. And then I went on I wrote, there's a book called The Young Professional, which is the first book I came out with. It was published by Cengage Publishers, an American publishing firm. And it's a career guidebook for people going into young people going into the professions. And it matched what I was doing. Like, I was an immigration lawyer. I had young people coming through my office all the time, helping them. And I could see that these young people pretty much had three problems in three areas, one of three, or maybe two, or even three of three areas: money, time, and balance. So I wrote a book about, how to handle money, how to handle time, and how to handle balance. And I told some stories in there and so on. All my books, by the way, are available on Amazon if you want to pick up any book. So that's called The Young Professional. And then after that, I published a book about my mother, my dear mother, to me, dear, called A Promise Kept, a tribute to a mother's love, about her life story, which is an immigrant experience story. That none of these books became New York. I'm not a New York Times bestseller. Nobody's ever heard of me in New York as a writer. Like I'm Joe Blow on the streets of New York or anywhere else in North America, really, in terms of books published. Although my books are very good, and I realized over time, after publishing the fifth book, that the big deal is marketing the books. There's a difference between, this is a little story, between how a duck lays an egg and how a chicken lays an egg. A duck, when it lays an egg, it goes quack. That's it. A chicken lays an egg and it's quack, 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 quack. That's marketing. And if you don't go quack, 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 your books are going to be like my books were in the garage. And I can tell you if you're a writer by opening your garage. And if you got books in your garage, you're a writer, because that's the way the writing business goes. And it's well, you know this probably way better than I do, because you're interviewing these people all the time. But I learned from my own experience that no marketing means no sales, and the books don't go anywhere. And no matter how they could be genius books, but they're not going to go anywhere. And even if you go through professional publishers, like in Canada, just to give you an illustration, I told you I grew up in Canada, so some of these stories are from Canada. 10,000 sales is a bestseller in Canada, which is like chicken feed in the United States. Who cares about 10,000 books? But try and sell 10,000 books. I gather the average writer, if you publish a book, you sell under 500 books. Most people don't go very far. But we're all interested because it's the creative process. And that's a long way of answering a question, which is, why do you start writing? And the answer is, I felt a sense, a calling, that I've got good things to say and to share with the world. But the world wasn't listening. Certainly not when I was presenting in Toastmasters, except in my club, oh, good boy, nice and good boy, that kind of thing. Uh, and even when I published my books, nobody was reading. I sold, 300-400 books or whatever. Uh, and I got to this point, which is, I don't care. I don't care if you don't read my book. I know my books are good. I know it in here. I know. This book about Solomea, it's a bestseller. It's a New York Times #1 book. I know it is. The world doesn't have to tell me. I know it's that good. Why? I spent 10 years writing it. Over 100 people, top editors in the world, edited that book. People who love opera contributed their heart and soul into that book. There are people in the museum, the Krushelnytska Museum, Solomea Krushelnytska Museum in View in Western Ukraine, that have dedicated their lives to telling her life story. And they opened that museum to me and gave me everything I wanted to write that book. I wrote the book, and I'll tell you one other thing about the book. I wrote the book, and I was so moved by her story and so intensely interested in telling it, in part because of a picture that you'll see right above my head over here, and a story that my little daughter told me about Solomea Krushelnytska. And the story was, she'd go over to my mother's house as a little kid, my daughter. She's now 36, but then she was like 7. And my mother, whose name was also Solomea, like after the opera star, told her about the opera star and intensely wanted the child to know about the greatness of this woman, in part because my mother, who was her niece, lived with her through the war in Lviv, Western Ukraine, throughout the whole German occupation, the Soviets, when the Holocaust happened, for one thing. I'm not Jewish, I'm Ukrainian, but I respect the Holocaust. And, everything that happened there was outrageous, outrageous. And there were also people, including Ukrainian intellectuals, and so on, who died. This woman, my great aunt, saved my mother and our family during the hardest parts of World War II. So my mother insisted that my daughter know about her history. And the problem was, why didn't the English world know about her history? And there were reasons, because she ended up behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. No news got out, nothing. We learned about her death in 1958, I believe it was, when I was 5 years old. And she died in 1952. It took 5 years for news about her death to get out from the Soviet Union. That's how compressed life was there. And that's why her contemporaries, people like Caruso, like Puccini, like Toscanini that I've mentioned, their lives went on in the West and people knew about them. But she was lost to the world, to the English world, the Western world, because the Iron Curtain had come down. That was, so anyway, it moved me. And I decided, okay, world, I'm going to tell you this story. And it's up to you. But I know it's a powerful story.
When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
I was thinking young women like my daughter who need role models and people who can show them how to make it to the very top. Solomea, I mentioned earlier when we started, this is not a book about opera. I mean, it's about opera, but what it is, it's about the human experience and the striving to make it to the very top. It's a feminist book in the sense that in her time, 1904, she rose to the very top of the world in opera, the field that she chose. You may choose podcasting as a career. I may choose immigration as a career, or writing as a career. That was her choice for her career. But the point was she devoted herself to that career and rose from obscurity to world fame. That's a story for in particular, young women, but young people to share. And I thought, there's a lot of guys like me, a lot of women like me, not like me, but like grandmothers and grandparents and even parents who, are looking for inspirational life stories to tell their kids, to reaffirm in this terrible world that we're, like right now it's so rocky. There's no, like at times you think there's no hope in this world. What's going on? People have gone crazy. Where are these valuable people who lead lives of purpose and meaning, who contribute the very best that they can give to the world? Stories like that. And that's what this book is about, a story like that.
Amazing. And you touched on this next question, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Okay, so I told you the Toastmasters experience. That was going on while I was writing. And it goes on to this day. I follow what's going on in the speaking world very carefully and closely. I love speakers and presenters. So that was one part of it. But I've been writing now let's put it this way. The first published book that I was involved in, which was when my son was 12 and he's now 40. So let's say 30 years roughly. But my first book came out about, say, 25 years ago. But I'll tell you this, if you write one book, and even it's not published like worldwide, but you just publish it, I would bet on you. I would bet on it that you will write more than one book. You'll end up being a multi-book author.
Love that.
Veins. Yeah.
Love it. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Okay, well, weekends. Okay, look, I work full time. I'm still working right now. I'm a U.S. Canadian immigration lawyer at Pace Law Firm. 9 to 5, I'm in the office, blah, 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 and dealing with clients and all that stuff. So it's not happening while I'm in the office, except in here, it's happening. At lunchtime, I'm thinking, oh, that ending wasn't so good. I think maybe that guy should know, oh, no, I got it, like that. This thing's going on all the time. In my spare moments, in all my spare moments, I'm thinking, like if I'm working on a book like Solomea, that's what's happening up here. And it happened for 10 years, like 10 years. Like, to me, that's like, I don't want another book for 10 years. That's too much. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is weekends, vacations. I'm writing a book. Now, not all of the weekend. I'm not like, Mr. Dull. I like going out. I like having a party. I love friends. But, on a weekend, I'll spend Saturday and Sunday, except for like funerals, marriages, weddings, things happen in your life. You got to be there. I'm all in. But when that's not happening, my dear wife, who's out there somewhere in the back, allows me to close the door, and I'm in here, like this. Um, so uh, there are times when I'll take a 2 week break, and I'll work for 2 weeks on the book. Not like I'll work, let's say, maybe 10 hours a day for like 5 days, then take a day or two off, and then again 10, like that for a couple of weeks. And over time, um, it comes out. And the closer you get to the end, the more you're thinking, okay, I got to get this out. Look, this is getting pretty good. Okay, if I could just do this, clean it up, get it feedback from people. This is terrible. Forget this. And for this book, for example, Solomea, I mentioned over 100 people have contributed. One editor that I hired, and by the way, this book cost me a lot of money. It's not for them. I'm not going to make any money on this book. It's just not going to happen. You may think you're stupid. What are you doing? Writing books for no money? Like, depends on your values. Does it matter to you? What's your life really mean? What are you here for? Is it, are people going to say when you die, he made a lot of money? That's what his life was. He made a lot of money. He traded his life for money. Imagine that. Trade your life for money. I don't get that. I don't get it. On the other hand, what's his name? Van Gogh devoted his whole life to painting. He let go of everything else. His life was a disaster, but he painted, miraculous paintings. I think that's maybe going too far on the other end, like you got to look after your life too, pay the groceries and everything like that, right? People can't starve. You got a family, you got to feed the family. Forgive me, I'm just going all over the damn place.
No, you're fine. You're
Yeah.
totally fine. I do have a question about your writing space. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Well, I write on Apple, like what I'm looking at right here, Apple computer, Mac. Now, for 20 years, I was devoted to the PC, like totally devoted. One day, some guy said, hey, try a Mac. I said, no, it's a Mac. Mac, are you crazy? I don't need Mac. Oh, try it. I tried it. Oh, all my life I've been down, climbing the wrong tree. It's the Mac. And, now I'm the only guy in the office, in the law office, with a Mac. Everybody else is on a PC, and they think I'm an idiot. I don't think they're idiots, but I don't agree with them on that. I like a Mac. Anyway, so I use a Mac. I have a laptop. It's in a bag. Apple laptop. But I can't seem to work on there. I like to work on a Mac. And I'll tell you one thing. Here's a tip that I think was fantastic. I had a client. His name was Ted Nicholas. He sold over $900 million worth of copy to clients. He was friends with all these phenomenal people: Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Ayn Rand, like you name it. He was friends with them. And I said to him, Ted, how did you sell this copy? He said, titles. Titles are very important. I said, what about titles? He says, when I do a title, I take out a pad, a writing pad. I don't have a yellow writing pad. He uses yellow writing pad and a pen. And I write out 100 titles, 100 titles. And he says, the title that's going to work is not the first one that comes out, And it may not be the last one. It'll be somewhere in the middle in there, maybe number 14 or whatever. But the process of actually writing out the title on paper, not a computer, not in your head, but writing it out one after another for 100 titles is the process that made him $900 million. So I figure, well, if it's doing so good for him, I'll do it. Now, I confess I don't actually follow his advice, which is terrible. But what I do is I use ChatGPT, and I ask it, okay, here's the story. What's the title that's suitable? Give me 50. I don't go to 100. I find that within 50, I can usually find a good title, and I pull the title out that way. So, yeah.
What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
Now, I should say water and, I don't know what, something healthy like salad or something. Uh, but it's not. Um, right now, I'm drinking this Nestle's iced tea. I don't know if you know that you can get it here in Canada. I'm not sure they have. I looked around for it in New York and I couldn't find it. But I'm sure it's around somewhere. Nestle's, I think it's reached America somewhere. So that's what I drink is, and they have cans or in bottles. And I drink this is all for nutritionists, they're going to kill me about this, but I drink not the sugar one, but the non-sugar one. Um, and snack wise, I'm addicted to peanuts. I shouldn't eat them. I keep gaining weight every time I start eating peanuts. I declare in public that I'm not going to eat any more peanuts, and then 2 weeks later, I'm eating peanuts again. But that's a favorite little snack of mine. And I have a routine diet-wise. So, for example, I'll share this with you. I believe, first of all, there's the number one commandment in eating is "Thou shalt not poison thyself." Meaning, don't eat sugar, don't eat salt, don't eat white flour products. You know, like don't overdo it with alcohol, cigarette. The whole works. Cocaine, heroin, the whole works. Whatever you're on, stop it. But I believe that if you can eat a good breakfast, you're halfway home to a fairly good diet. So I try to eat a really good breakfast, which is granola. And I'll tell you a little story about that. I'm sitting there. Actually, I'm writing my book, and a friend of mine, Peter Smilsky, comes to stay with me for a few days. And we're sitting around the kitchen table. And I said, well, let's have some breakfast. So I pull out this granola, Harvest Crunch granola, which I like. And I pour some for me, and he's not eating it. I don't know what he's eating, toast or something like that. And he pulls the box out and he starts reading what are the ingredients in the box. And he's irritating me, and I'm eating my favorite, and he's like, never mind what's in my box. Eat your own damn breakfast. But he said, okay, what is it? Well, there's all these preservatives in the box. Why are you eating all these preservatives? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, why don't you? There's a place here called Bulk Barn. It's sort of like in the United States. What's the health food store, like Trader Joe's or something like that, right? He says, come on with me to Bulk Barn. And he takes the box with him. I says, okay, what do you got in this? And he pulled out oats and whatever it is that's in there, peanuts and almonds and all that. So just take all those products, but don't bother including all the preservatives and all the unhealthy stuff. And I started eating this kind of granola, homemade granola, in that way. That's what I eat every day, with strawberries and blueberries. And this is way off topic. Like, what the heck? Blueberries. My saying for blueberries, I tell my children, if you want cancer, don't eat blueberries. It's that simple. If you want cancer, don't eat blueberries. And they hate that. Absolutely. But I believe that, within reason, I think that's true. You got to eat berries. So strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, I throw that in there and I eat with milk, this granola. That carries me for half a day. I try to eat a reasonable lunch, which is a sandwich, or sometimes I have soup with sandwich of some kind, and this Nestle's tea. And then I eat a dinner. Like if I'm going to have a bad meal, it's going to be the dinner. But my wife cooks fairly decent food, like really good food, actually. So that's my diet, and it helps me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I'll tell you what I'm enjoying right now. Les Miserables. Now, I like audiobooks. By the way, my book Solomea is an audiobook. It's best if you like audiobooks, buy the audiobook. I promise you it'll be a great listen. So I'm listening to audiobooks, Les Mis. It's like something like 65 hours long. And I'm in the car when I'm driving anywhere, I play this book. So I'm at like 45 right now, meaning I got 45 hours to go. Now, this book is fantastic. If you've seen Les Mis, you'll know what the story is. Um, it's a phenomenal story, but in this book, this author goes, and it's Victor Hugo. He goes off on tangents, for I don't know, probably 50 pages about Waterloo and how Napoleon lost Waterloo to Wellington. So you got to skim through those pages to get to what the meat is. But it's a phenomenal book. But generally, I do not read novels. Generally, I do read occasional novels. I make up for it by going to a lot of movies, films. I get my novel sort of input from films. I read history and biography, any history or biography, especially a biography of people like celebrities or people who have, made it in the world or who have not made it in the world. So, for example, recently, I've been reading everything I can about what's going on in Washington and, the Trump and his rise to power and so on. And the people around him and, the history of Biden and Trump over the last 8 years. That's the area I'm preoccupied with at the moment.
Mm. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Uh, there's one author speaker who's had a big impact on my life. There are a couple of them, but the one I'm most sort of struck by was Zig Ziglar. And, he wrote a book called "See You at the Top." It's a long time ago that he wrote this book, and it's a career guidebook, something like The Young Professional, my book. And there are two. I'll tell you two things from that book that I think are phenomenal. One is a philosophy I picked out about leading my life. Remind me about the other one. It's a story about Matisse, the artist Matisse. In case I forget, about your life, leading your life in some meaningful way. He had this saying: "You can get anything you want in life so long as you help enough other people get what they want." You can get anything you want in your life so long as you help enough other people get what they want. I think that's a summary philosophy for the way you should lead your life. Now, there's another philosophy. The other philosophy is just give me what I want and to hell with everybody else. There are people with that kind of a philosophy. I don't like that philosophy. I prefer Ziegler's philosophy. And I see it as, like, let's work together and let's sort out each other's problems together, help each other. It's the golden rule, basically. So I picked that up from him, and I've carried it through my life, and I try to live by that rule. In his book, he tells the story of Auguste Renoir, who's a famous painter. And one day, Henri Matisse went to visit Auguste Renoir, two famous painters. And he's watching Renoir paint in his studio. And every time Renoir is touching the canvas with the paintbrush, pain is shooting down, arthritic pain is shooting down his arm, and he's wincing from the pain. And he's watching, and Matisse is watching this. And finally he says, if it hurts so much, why on earth do you do it? And Renoir says, the pain passes, but the beauty lasts forever.
That, love that. What books did you grow up reading, and did you have an all-time favorite?
Uh, I'm not what you would expect, which is, first of all, I read, but I never read any books on purpose until I finished high school. What I read was, whatever was required in school, but I didn't do any extra reading other than comic books, and like magazines until I finished high school. That was a big mistake. But in high school, I would say that when I went through high school, I read, like Shakespeare and, all these, The Tale of Two Cities and all this stuff. And I knew the literature was great when I read it. I could sense the greatness of it. But I had this perversion, which is the teachers sucked all the life out of the story and out of the literature by analyzing it. Like, what is it about this? How do you like? And I couldn't relate to that. I listened and I participated in these classes, but it just destroyed the interest I had, and the result is I pushed it away. To this day, Shakespeare, I'm ashamed to say I don't read Shakespeare. I know all about Shakespeare. I know the play Romeo and Juliet and all that stuff, but I don't go out of my way to read Shakespeare, and I should. I need to get on that, on that train. It's something in my life still that I need to get on. Or other, what? Recently, I've been reading this Les Miserables, and there have been what happens is someone recommends a book to me. My wife reads novels every day. She's reading every top novelist there is. I'm just watching her from day to day. She's reading a novel every time I see her. I'm thinking, gee, my life is so like, what's wrong with me? I'm totally in a different world. I don't,
Just if you had an all-time favorite, and, on the other side of that, though, like, do you have any favorite series now as an adult, or authors that if they come out with something, that you automatically grab?
just for the children's side, uh, Huxley, that series. I read the series for my kids, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is something I really should have read all along when I was a kid. So that might answer that question. Adult-wise, I don't read books because of an author. I read books because of a theme or a topic or a genre. So I can't say I have like I like some historians, for example, Anne Applebaum or Timothy Snyder are two authors that I admire, revere for their work and how well they write. But I can't say that I go out and look for books written by them, especially. Someone I really like is Masha Gessen, if you know who that is. I love her courage. I think she's such a courageous woman. And like another person that I really admire is Liz Cheney for writing that book on what was it? Oath and Honor, I think is the name of the book. I really admired that book.
So, what would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Uh, well, don't do what I did, which is not read anything until after high school. Start reading right away. Read what interests you, whatever it is if you're interested in cars and mechanics, read that. If you're interested in romance and sex, read that. Whatever it is you're interested in, pour it on. Get into it all the way as much as you can. That would be my advice on that one.
Amazing. And on the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
All right. The only sort of caveat I have about that is, a couple of things. Number one, if it has something to do with tragedy in your life, you have to be sure you've lived through it and you are recovering whatever it is. So, for example, but if there's a tragedy that happened in your life and you lived it and you're still emotionally tied into the tragedy, it's too early to write about it. You have to have emerged from the other side, and then you can reflect back. And it's therapeutical to do that. So that's a good thing to do. If you're starting out, don't expect to have a New York Times bestseller as your first book. Maybe you will. God bless you if you do, but I suspect you won't. But don't be ashamed and don't be disappointed. Your book is your entry into the world, sharing your life and what means something to you with the world. Out there are people who share your values, and they hopefully will find you and read what you say. That's the whole idea behind a book.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
I once went on a hunger strike for 10 days in support of a Soviet historian named Valentin Moroz. I lasted 10 days, and then I had to get out because I had jaundice. Um, he finally got out. He turned out to be not a nice guy. I'm sorry. like, I mean, he served the cause because he was a dissident, and the Soviet Union was terrible, and he was, trying to loosen up things and lead a normal life. That part of his story was good, but it turned out that he was a bit of a disappointment as a human being once he got out.
Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Well, maybe I'll give you one last thing. 4 rules for a successful life. Not that I made up, someone else did. Dan Sullivan, the strategic coach, is where I got most of this. Number 1, do what you promise. Number 2, come on time. Number 3, finish what you start. Number 4, mean what you say. Meaning, and that one I like to explain a little bit by saying, don't be, what's the word? Cynical. Talk in truths. talk and what means things to you. Share your truth with the world.
Love that. Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
Okay. Pacelawfirm.com is where I work. You can always find me there. Andy Semotiuk is my name. The place for books, if you want to find out about my books, is either the website bysolomeabook.com, Solomea, Solomea, bysolomeabook.com, or you can go to my website, which is myworkvisa.com, and I have the books listed there. To get like an autograph copy, not coffee, but copy. This is just for those who want an autograph coffee, not coffee. Go to solomeabook.com. Bysolomeabook.com is about all the books. Solomeabook.com is if you want an autographed copy. You have to write that you want an autographed copy, and I'll send you one.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes so that everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Loved being with you, Courtney. Thank you so much for having me.